I was invited by a nice congressman from West Virginia to come to the State of the Union address. The president, duly elected president of the United States, addressing a joint session of Congress.
As many of you know, President Trump recently delivered his State of the Union address, and several Catholic figures were in attendance, which has since sparked significant criticism and debate across social media and within Catholic circles. Many now are questioning whether it is appropriate for Catholics to attend such a politically charged event, and whether, if Catholics do attend, they are obligated to use such platforms to directly confront lawmakers on Catholic teachings in that moment. In the upcoming clip, Bishop Barron addresses these concerns directly and explains his reasoning. Let's listen.
All right, criticism number 5. Another longtime complaint of the online commentariat is that you, Bishop, and Word on Fire as a whole are both A, too political, because, for example, you recently attended the State of the Union at a congressman's invitation, and yet also B, not political enough, because you and the ministry do not publicly endorse and or condemn certain policies and politicians that some critics believe deserve either support or condemnation. So how, Bishop, do you respond to these apparently contradictory complaints that we're both too political and not political enough?
Well, yeah, I'll just observe, what we said earlier is the case here. It's always both left and right, both liberals and conservatives get mad for different reasons. And it's because you're not making the right distinctions. I'll say a word about the State of the Union thing, because there was the level of stupidity in the commentariat about that was staggering. Even though I'm used to stupid commentary, it was staggering. I was invited by a nice congressman from West Virginia to come to the State of the Union address. The president, duly elected president of the United States, addressing a joint session of Congress. Look, I'm an American citizen. I find that fascinating, interesting. I didn't give a speech. I didn't endorse anybody. I didn't hold forth on any political matter. I sat in a chair in the gallery and listened at the kind invitation of a congressman to the duly elected president address the Congress. What's the matter with that? How is that being too political? That's accepting a kind invitation and taking in a speech. I did a little video in the wake of it. The only time, because people said, oh, he's going as he's a Trump supporter and a Trumpian, advocate. The only mention I made of President Trump was, I'm not a cheerleader for President Trump. That's the one comment I made. I said, I'm a cheerleader for Catholic social teaching. It's true. And then I said, it was kind of a disconcerting display of the disunity in our country. And when I saw the two sides of the Congress so obviously at odds, and I called for greater civility. Okay, show me the problem with that, One of my favorites was, there was a photo of me shaking hands with the Speaker of the House, right, Mike Johnson. I was invited to the Speaker's reception, which had like hundreds of people at it. There's a huge crowd. And eventually my host, the congressman, brought me in, and I met the Speaker of the House. And I shook his hand, and I smiled, and someone took a picture. Why didn't you tell him? Yeah, at a reception. What, I'm going to punch the Speaker of the House, or I'm going to start lecturing the Speaker of the House. I also loved, he goes to Washington, and is he going to speak truth to power? Yeah, I'm going to stand up in the gallery at the State of the Union address and start shouting at the president. I mean, there's the lunacy of these suggestions. So anyway, that was, to me, just a ridiculous observation. What was the second?
To understand his response, we first need to recognize the mindset of some of his critics. Many operate under the assumption that the only authentic way to speak truth to power is through immediate and visible confrontation, that every invitation, every public stage, and every microphone must be used as an opportunity to rebuke political leaders in real time. According to this view, if you're not openly challenging authority in that precise moment, you must be compromising. Yet, this approach effectively reduces Christian witness to constant protest and leaves no space for prudence, discernment, relationship building, or long-term influence. By contrast, Scripture presents a far richer and more nuanced model. Christ instructs his disciples to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, which means that courage must be always joined to intelligence. St. Paul lived out that balance in practice. Nowhere is this clearer than in Athens at the Areopagus. Paul did not begin by condemning the Greeks outright, nor did he open with language certain to alienate his audience. Instead, he started with their altar to an unknown God, meeting them where they were intellectually and culturally, and then gradually leading them toward the fullness of the gospel. In other words, he stepped into their world before inviting them into Christ. With that biblical framework in mind, it is not difficult to see how the United States Congress, during a State of the Union address, could function as the kind of modern Areopagus, a central arena where power, ideas, and national direction converge. While some may argue that it would be a bold prophetic act for a Catholic attending such an event to stand up and deliver an impromptu lecture on Catholic social teaching, but the practical outcome of that would almost certainly be swift removal from the chamber, turning what might have been a thoughtful and strategic presence into little more than symbolic theatrics. Zeal detached from prudence is not genuine evangelization strategy. In the next clip, Bishop Barron goes further by explaining how he discerns which political matters require direct public comment and which call for a different mode of engagement.
That we're not political enough because
yeah.
we don't endorse or condemn or get involved
Yeah,
at the
and-
policy level.
I mean, you know this too very well, is that a distinction has always got to be made between certain matters that are clear instances of something that's morally wrong and problematic. So let's say abortion is a prime example. It's intrinsically evil. There's no excuse for that. There's no way you can justify it. And the church can and should speak out clearly. Same thing with euthanasia. Same thing with capital punishment. Same thing with the abuse of children. I mean, certain things are objectively, intrinsically evil. Other things are a matter of political prudence. Other things are, yeah, the principles are clear, but now how do we apply the principles in this case? It's a matter of prudential judgment. Good example would be the immigration debate. That all people should be treated with love and respect? Yes. All people are sources of infinite dignity? Of course. Now, how do you manage the border of a country? How do you particularly manage these complex issues? Well, I'm not an expert in that. I'm not proposing legislation. That's not my job. So the church can and should speak out in those former cases. The latter cases, I think the church should articulate the great principles and then say it's up to your prudential judgment. I have been very clear, and go in my record there, on abortion. I said all kinds of things very clearly against it. Capital punishment, I've spoken out very clearly against. So I think that's the distinction that often gets blurred there when you say you're not political enough. We should back away from matters that are legitimately left to the prudential judgment of those who are skilled in those areas, let's say.
How do you respond to those who see this conflict and say, Bishop, I wish you and Word on Fire would just not say anything at all that could have any kinds of political...
Because you can't, because Christianity is not a private matter. It's a public reality. And we can and should speak in the public forum about these ethical matters of clear importance. So, no, that's an attempt to privatize.
Mm-hmm.
And see, again, people blur all of that when they start throwing around, church and state and the wall of separation. And there's all kinds of confusion around that. I think this is the clear distinction that has to be made between certain things that are intrinsically evil that show up in the public forum and they have to be called out, and then things that are matters of prudential judgment. And sure, if let's say you're a left-wing publication and you've got certain opinions about what the law should look like, off you go. You're a right-wing publication. You're a left-wing politician, a right-wing politician. Fine, that's your business. But as a bishop of the church, mine is not to intervene when it comes to those particular matters of prudential judgment.
I find this reasoning compelling. When the matter at hand involves an intrinsic evil, such as abortion, adultery, or child abuse, the church has not only the right, but the duty to speak clearly and publicly, because these are moral absolutes that do not depend on political preference or policy calculation. There is no room for ambiguity when fundamental moral truths are at stake. However, when the issue does not involve an intrinsic evil, but instead concerns prudential questions of policy, governance, or strategy, the church's role shifts. In those cases, the church must articulate the moral principles that should guide society while allowing elected officials and citizens to work out the concrete applications through legitimate political processes, including elections and debate. Consider, for example, the issue of illegal immigration. Here, the church can and should affirm two fundamental principles. First, that every sovereign nation has the right to secure and protect its borders. And second, that prosperous nations carry a moral responsibility to show compassion and offer refuge to those genuinely fleeing persecution. Holding both principles together is not a contradiction, but a moral tension. The precise policy solutions that balance border security with humanitarian concern are matters of prudential judgment, and that distinction between moral absolutes and policy application is essential for understanding how the church engages political life without becoming partisan. As Pope Benedict XVI says, the church's role is not to make politics, but to form consciences. I hope this video is helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. God bless you.